children. In today's class, we will be discussing energy flow in an ecosystem. Energy flow in an ecosystem is always unidirectional. What do we mean by this unidirectional flow of energy? In an ecosystem, there are various trophic levels. There are different types of organisms like producers, consumers, and then what happens? Energy always flows from producers to consumers, and consumers can further be classified as primary consumer, secondary consumer. Like herbivores which feed on plants are known as primary consumer, and carnivores which feed on herbivores can be considered as secondary consumer. So what happens? Energy always flows from plants which are producers to primary consumer which are herbivores, and then from primary consumer to secondary consumers which are which feed on herbivores. So we can say energy flow in an ecosystem is unidirectional. And now let's discuss a very important law which is called 10% law. According to 10% law, what happens? Only 10% of energy is transferred from one trophic level to other. Because what happens? From plants, energy is transferred to herbivores. So plants, they don't give 100% of their energy to herbivores. They need energy for their own growth, development and metabolism. So only 10% of energy is transferred from one trophic level to other trophic level. This is also the reason that energy flow is unidirectional. Then there are different types of food chains. So one of the chain is grazing food chain or predator food chain. What happens in case of a simple grazing food chain? Energy is provided by sun. So solar energy is the source of energy in case of a grazing food chain. Then plants, they trap the solar energy and they synthesize organic material using inorganic materials. So since plants produce energy using solar energy, they are called primary producers. And then organisms which feed on these plants are known as primary consumers. So these primary consumers are also known as herbivores. Then organisms which feed on these primary consumers, they are secondary consumers. And secondary consumer, then organisms feeding on secondary consumers are known as tertiary consumers, and organisms feeding on tertiary consumers are known as quaternary consumers. And all these consumers, secondary, tertiary and quaternary consumers, are collectively called carnivores. So we can classify carnivores in three categories: secondary consumer, tertiary consumer and quaternary consumers. And then as a result of death and decay of plants and animals, what happens? Which organisms are involved in death and decomposition? These are bacteria and fungi. So they are responsible for decomposition of organic matter and we can say nutrient cycling. So this is an example of simple grazing predator food chain. Now let's discuss detritus food chain. Detritus food chain begins with dead organic matter. This dead organic matter is known as detritus. So organisms which are feeding on detritus, there are organisms which are dependent on dead decaying organic matter. They are of two types: detritivores and decomposers. Decomposers are the organisms which release digestive enzymes and digestion occurs outside their body. And what happens in case of detritivores? They feed on detritus like earthworm. So what happens? This chain begins with dead organic matter and then passes through detritus feeding organisms which are present in soil to the organisms which feed on detritus feeders. So this we can see in this slide. There is detritus, and this detritus includes fallen leaves and other organic material. So this detritus is eaten by earthworm, which is detritivore. Remember, earthworm is detritivore. It is not a decomposer. Then it is eaten by other organisms. So these are organisms which are feeding on detritivores. So what happens? This is an example of detritus food chain. And detritus food chain also includes decomposers. Decomposers are microorganisms like bacteria and fungi. In this slide, we observe a connection between GFC and DFC. So what happens? These chains, DFCs and GFCs, these are connected, interconnected at some trophic level. So we can see this grazing food chain where there are plants. These plants are eaten by grasshopper. Grasshopper is herbivore. It eats blades of grass. Then what happens? It is eaten by, this grasshopper is eaten by carnivorous shrews, and then the shrew is eaten by an owl or by other birds. So this is an example of a single simple grazing food chain. Now there is another food chain which is in this ecosystem, that is detritus food chain. So there is dead organic matter and there are microorganisms which are decomposing this dead organic matter. There are beetles or other small insects which are also feeding on this dead decaying organic matter. So what happens? These are, these occupy second trophic level in a detritus food chain. And then these insects, these small insects which were feeding on this dead decaying organic matter, these can be eaten by the organism which is involved in the grazing food chain. So what is happening here? There is connection between GFC and DFC. And what about this? These organisms can then further be eaten by other organisms like bacteria, fungi. These can be eaten by the protozoans, and then these small insects can be eaten by spider. And what about this? We can also see that this small insect which is feeding on decaying organic matter, that can also feed on plants. So we can see that food chains are interconnected, and they are interconnected at different trophic levels. And if we see a terrestrial ecosystem, much larger fraction of energy that flows through detritus food chain as compared to GFC. So we have two types of systems, ecosystems. One is aquatic ecosystem. So in case of aquatic ecosystem, amount of organic matter, since plants are less in aquatic ecosystem, amount of organic matter present is very less. So in case of aquatic ecosystem, decomposition process is less because amount of organic matter is less. So major conduit for energy flow is GFC in case of aquatic ecosystem. And if we see this terrestrial ecosystem, in case of terrestrial ecosystem, let's take an example of forest ecosystem. There are so many fallen leaves, there is large amount of organic matter which is decaying. So more of energy that flows through detritus food chain. Both chains, GFC and DFC, both are working in, both are observed in both ecosystems like aquatic and terrestrial. Aquatic ecosystem has GFC and DFC both. Similarly, terrestrial ecosystem has both GFC and DFC. But in aquatic ecosystem, GFC is more involved. Amount of dead decaying organic matter, plant material, that is less in aquatic ecosystem because plants are less in aquatic ecosystem. There are some free floating, some submerged plants. So amount of organic plant material is less in aquatic ecosystem. So more of energy flows through GFC. And in case of terrestrial ecosystem, much larger fraction of energy flows through detritus food chain as compared to GFC. And then food web. In previous slide we observed interconnection of food chains. Here we can also see that this interconnection of different food chains, that is responsible for formation of food web. So what do we observe? When different food chains are naturally interconnected, then a food web is formed. A specific herbivore of one food chain that may serve as food of carnivores of other chains. like one insect, small insect that can be eaten by frog, that can be eaten by a bird also. So a food web is formed by interconnection of different food chains, and an organism which can eat different types of organisms, like a sparrow, house sparrow. House sparrow can eat seeds, it can eat small insects as well. So organisms which can eat variety of food items, they are called polyphagous organisms. Now trophic level. What do we mean by a trophic level? A group of organisms irrespective of their size. Why do we say this term irrespective of their size? If we consider a level, all the herbivores, let's discuss all the herbivores. So when we discuss all the herbivores, so camel is herbivore, an elephant is herbivore, and a grasshopper is herbivore, and deer is herbivore. Their sizes are very much different. So irrespective of their sizes, they all are herbivores. They all occupy second level in an ecosystem. First level is occupied by plants, and all plants, whether they are small herbaceous or they are shrubs or they are very tall trees, all plants, irrespective of their sizes, they all occupy first trophic level, and all herbivorous organisms, all herbivorous, whether it is a small bird, it is a camel, it is elephant, it is deer, irrespective of their sizes, all the organisms which are dependent directly on plants, which are herbivorous, they occupy second trophic level. Now let us discuss standing crop. Standing crop is the mass of living material at a particular time at a trophic level. So at a particular time, all the amount of organic material which is present, that is called standing crop. And standing crop is measured as the mass of living organisms or the number in a unit area. So when we can count number of organisms, we measure standing crop in terms of number, and if counting is not possible, like in case of a grassland, so how will we measure standing crop? So in that case, in case of a grassland, amount of plant material, we measure biomass of the crop field. Now let us see this pyramid. Pyramids show number or mass or energy at different trophic levels. So here is an example of a pyramid of number. So in this we see that base of the pyramid is broad and it is gradually narrowing down at the apex. So this pyramid is pyramid of number, and by observing this pyramid we can find out that the number of producers is maximum. Primary consumers like herbivores are less than producers. Number of secondary consumers and tertiary consumers, their number is less than primary consumer. So what are we observing? That as we go up trophic levels, the number of organisms is gradually decreasing. So these pyramids show relationships between different organisms at different trophic levels, and this relationship is shown in terms of number, in terms of energy, or in terms of mass. So the pyramid of number in a tree ecosystem, that is inverted. So we need to remember examples of inverted pyramids. Inverted pyramids, pyramid of number in a tree ecosystem, and pyramid of biomass in sea or in any aquatic ecosystem, that is inverted. So there are two examples of inverted ecosystems. One is pyramid of number in a tree ecosystem and the pyramid of biomass in aquatic ecosystem. Because why is pyramid of biomass of aquatic ecosystem inverted? Because number of biomass of fishes that far exceeds that of biomass of phytoplanktons. So we will be discussing in next slide. And pyramid of energy is always upright because of the 10% law that we discussed in the beginning. So since only 10% of energy is passed on from lower trophic level to higher trophic levels, pyramid of energy is always upright. Now let us see this inverted pyramid. This is an example of a pond ecosystem, and this is pyramid of biomass. So what do we see here? These are phytoplanktons. Biomass of phytoplanktons is much less than the biomass of all other organisms, because phytoplanktons are microscopic organisms. So their biomass is the least. And then zooplanktons, these are generally protozoans. Their biomass is more than phytoplanktons. Then biomass of small fishes, which are secondary consumers, their biomass is more than biomass of zooplanktons. And what about tertiary consumers, large fishes? Their biomass is more than the biomass of small fishes. So as we move up the trophic levels, from lower trophic level to higher trophic level, what do we observe? Biomass is gradually increasing, because we always start from the producers. So in case of a pond ecosystem, phytoplanktons, some free floating and some submerged plants, they form the producers. So here, if we consider phytoplanktons, then phytoplanktons are, their biomass is the least, and then gradually biomass is increasing. That is why this type of pyramid is inverted pyramid. So pyramid of biomass of pond ecosystem is inverted. Now let us see this tree ecosystem. In case of tree ecosystem, we observe both types of pyramids, inverted as well as upright. Why is this inverted? Because why is this upright? Because in this case we see this is pyramid of biomass. This first one is pyramid of biomass. This one is pyramid of biomass. So what do we observe in pyramid of biomass? There is this single tree, but its biomass is maximum. Its biomass is more than all the consumers. So this is maximum. Then caterpillars, their biomass is less than tree, and then there are some birds which feed on these caterpillars, and then number of hawks or tertiary consumers, their mass is even less than the biomass of the secondary consumers. So this is upright pyramid. And if we see inverted pyramid of biomass, in case of inverted also we move up the higher trophic levels. So from lower levels to higher levels, as we move up, then we observe that number is increasing. There is only one tree. The number of insects or birds, that is more than the number of trees. And then parasites which are living inside or outside the body of these herbivores, their number is more than these herbivores. And hyperparasites which attack these parasites, their number is even more than the number of parasites. So in case of a tree ecosystem, there can be both upright pyramid or inverted pyramid. So if we see pyramid of biomass, that is upright. And if we see pyramid of number of tree ecosystem, then it is inverted. So when you get a question of tree ecosystem, or if you get a question like give example of inverted pyramid, then don't simply write tree ecosystem. Tree ecosystem, mention pyramid of number of tree ecosystem is inverted. And what about pyramid of biomass of tree ecosystem? That is upright.